Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's virtual huddle. We're going to be going over wheat protein, how to grow it, and how to profit from it, hopefully. My name is Michelle Thompson. I am the market development agronomist for the Balcarres, Raymore, and Wynyard territories. And I will be joined by my cohort, Gerard Grayling, and he is one of our grain marketing specialists. And he's going to be going through the wheat markets and what we're looking at for this year and the coming years, hopefully. So just to let everybody know, this presentation will be recorded. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself if you're able to. Otherwise, please feel free to text myself at the number provided, or feel free to text the rep who invited you and send your questions to them, and they can direct it to whoever needs to answer those questions for you. Also, if your name isn't correct in the participants list, please let the rep who invited you know that you attended today, and you'll be entered to win some prizes. So we'll hopefully hand out some prizes at the end of the day. So with that, I will get started on the agronomics of protein here. And hopefully my slides work. All right, so protein impacts. What impacts protein? As we've seen over the past couple of years, environmental conditions can have a huge impact on whether we're looking at an average protein yield, a low protein year, or a high protein year. And unfortunately, these are out of our control, but definitely has an impact on what we see for protein. Variety can have an impact on protein. Some varieties are more, have a higher protein potential than others. And of course, most importantly, nutrients are definitely going to have the biggest impact on protein and the full fertility package that is on that field in that year. So environmental conditions, definitely out of our control, and but will have an impact. So unfortunately, wet or dry years, depending on the moisture, will impact protein and definitely yield as well. These moisture levels impact nutrient availability from natural release in the soil profile. So depending on how much moisture we have, will impact the natural breakdown of nutrients in our soils. So if our soil sample levels are showing high nitrogen, that's not always guaranteed depending on the moisture levels that we're going to have. Good moisture years usually means increased growth and higher yield potential, thus leading to probably an average or below average protein year. But we've seen over the past couple of years when we have that lower moisture and we've got lower growth and a little bit lower yield potential, our protein levels seem to be higher than average. Temperatures at heading definitely impacts the grain fill and the quality. So overall, the stressful conditions that the wheat crop will be going through every year will impact the yield and most importantly, protein. Variety opportunities. So different varieties have different yield potentials, and this is an older study done from 2009 in the University of Minnesota. And of course, most of these varieties are obsolete now, but what it shows is that as we increase our yield potential on the bottom line there, we definitely reduce that grain protein opportunity, and vice versa. When we're looking at a high protein variety, we're usually looking at a lower yield potential. What breeders are looking for is somewhere around that middle, where we're still getting good yield potential, but we still maintain a higher protein level. So I would say our genetics have changed quite a bit, and the newer varieties are a little bit different. Going into that, I definitely am not a specialist when it comes to grain varieties. So I just brought up the main varieties that I know come up in our area, Brandon being probably the number one. So Brandon over Cardale, which is the general check when we're looking at Canadian Western Red Spring, or Hard Red Spring, sorry. Definitely has a little bit higher yield potential, but lower protein potential. When we move into an Alita, which is one that's mentioned a couple times, a little bit higher yield potential and possibly protein potential, not by much, but higher than the Cardale. Landmark, definitely one that's been tried across the territory and definitely has yield potential and slight loss on protein compared to Cardale, but a little bit higher than Brandon. Tisdale, was one that was mentioned, and a little bit higher yield potential than Brandon, and definitely supposed to be increased on the protein potential. And another one that I've heard of that's pretty new is Wheatland. Definitely has really high yield potential, but the protein is going to be similar to Cardale, but above Brandon. So that's just based on the specs in the guides. So of course, the results on farm are going to vary year by year, but those are just some that have been come up, and maybe something you could try switching to if the variety you have is an older variety or just hasn't been performing the way you've expected it to. So nutrients. Nutrients by far is the most important thing we can do to impact protein. So when we're talking about nutrients, of course, we're going to focus on nitrogen. Nitrogen is definitely one of the biggest nutrients that we invest in, and we know has the biggest play in protein development. But we also should look at sulfur. And I would say more and more we are looking at including sulfur in our cereal blends and not just in our canola. And we have seen the impacts of that, better yield potential and just better proteins because of the place sulfur has with nitrogen. We should also be looking at micronutrients. Zinc and manganese have a huge impact on protein development, and it mostly involves in how nitrogen moves in the plant. So don't disregard any micronutrients. And of course, don't forget to look at your phosphorus, potassium, chloride, boron, copper, and everything else that goes along with a healthy soil. The more balanced your fertility plan can be, and the more prepared you can have that plant for any stressful conditions, the better off it's going to be in the long run. And hopefully you'll see that protein and yield bump from doing that. The best way to look at your nutrients is definitely by doing soil sampling or by doing a fertility planning with a yield goal in mind with an agronomist or with one of the reps, just to go through what are your goals and what should you be looking at for nutrient levels to make sure you're covering everything that plant is going to need. So nitrogen, we know nitrogen is a fundamental component in the building blocks of protein. So definitely the number one investment we make when we're buying fertilizer. This chart again is older from 2009 and again from the University of Minnesota. But what it shows is that the blue line is our yield line. And as we can see that we actually do maximize our nitrogen application. We see that line flatten out for our yield potential after applying 155 pounds of nitrogen. I would say this is older data, so the potentials of our varieties have definitely increased. So I would argue that level has definitely increased as well, probably looking more into the 160s, maybe up to 200 pounds now if we recreated this test. But just showing that there is a point when you can put down too much nitrogen and you're not going to get a return on that investment. Same with protein. The red line is protein, and they saw that line flatten out at 208 pounds of nitrogen. So after that application, they did not see an increase in protein by increasing nitrogen. So there is a balance of how much nitrogen we should be putting down and with what return we're getting for yield and for protein. So that's when we start looking at other nutrients. So like I said, sulfur, it's a component of protein, but it also plays an important role in the uptake of nitrogen within the plant. We know this, we've seen really increased yields with canola by increasing our sulfur, but we've also seen that with our cereals. So when you're looking at sulfur, one baseline you can use is an N to S ratio. So for canola, we're looking at a 5-to-1 ratio, so a little bit higher sulfur component to our nitrogen. But with cereals, we should still be looking at a 10-to-1. So if you are targeting 120 pounds of actual nitrogen with your cereal blend, you should also be putting down at least 12 pounds of sulfur to balance out that nitrogen sulfur ratio. And of course, micronutrients. So don't forget the little things. And as we've seen in soil sampling the past couple of years, it's really our micros that are starting to really jump out off those pages as low and have been kind of the focus of where we can build. So manganese and zinc were the two that I mentioned, both important in the uptake and use of nitrogen in plants. So sulfur, manganese, and zinc help with the plant to uptake that nitrogen to build that protein in the long run. So this was a study done in Yara in 2010, And they saw almost a 1% increase by adding manganese in with their check compared to their check, and almost 1.5% increase in protein by adding zinc alone. So by adding one of the couple of these micros into our blends, we can help impact that nitrogen use efficiency and hopefully impact protein in the long run. So the opportunities, what can we do to impact protein? Of course, we can't change the weather. You can change your variety if that's something you think might be an impact. Definitely look at the new varieties and implement something new. But I would think most importantly, what we can do is focus on the nutrients and what can we do there. So fertility planning, I had mentioned yield targeting and fertilizing accordingly. If you are targeting a higher yield potential and maybe you haven't been changing fertility plants, maybe it's time to accommodate those increased yields that you have been harvesting. And in the long run, hopefully you will see a protein increase with that just because you have balanced out that nitrogen and sulfur and manganese and zinc and everything else that goes along with that. Like I said, focusing on the nitrogen to sulfur ratio. If you haven't already, implementing sulfur into your cereal blends, just hopefully to see that increased nitrogen use efficiency with the sulfur application in there. Another product that you could look at is adding a slow release nitrogen source such as ESN into blends. So ESN is, like I said, a slow release nitrogen. And what we're targeting there is to provide nitrogen later on in the season when hopefully that plant is putting that nutrient in towards protein development. I included this field test that we did this year in Raymore. You will see that we didn't have any yield increase over a 20% ESN blend versus our 50% ESN blend, but we did see a 0.2 increase in protein. Now, it's not a lot and it wasn't enough to offset that extra cost of the ESN in this situation. However, we didn't have a check strip using our straight urea blend. If we had, I would suspect we would have at least seen that yield increase or possibly a protein increase. And that being said, we've seen better results with ESN in situations where we are below 13% protein. In situations where you're above that 13% and in that 13.5, it's been harder to impact protein at a 1% level. You're looking at point increases when you're starting at 13%. It just seems to level out at that 13%, and it's a lot harder to push it past that point when you're increasing or using ESN, or a future product I'll talk about is Last N. Another opportunity we have is to implement those micros. So I mentioned manganese and zinc. So what's an efficient way to put these products down? If you haven't heard us talk about ProCoat, I'm going to bring it up now. So ProCoat is a micro-treated onto granular fertilizer. So you're technically treating that granular fertilizer with that micro coating. And with those micro coatings, we can specify it by boron, copper, zinc, or we can give you a micro kind of package with BCMZ where you're getting boron, copper, manganese, and zinc all in one on your granular fertilizer. What's great about these products is you are going to get micro availability on every granular fertilizer that goes in that seed row. And I would personally put this on your FOSS products, just because if you can put those micros in that root zone, that's going to be the most efficient place for that root to find it and take it up. So you are making sure that that plant has access to grams of micros in every granular fertilizer that it comes in contact with, versus a granular fertilizer application of, say, a micro. You're gonna, by adding 1 pound of, say, zinc in with a blend, it's gonna be very hard for that plant to find that single granular that's probably every couple feet. So this is just a lot more agronomically sound, and it's an easy way of treating what's already going in the ground with a micro. So if you're looking at increasing manganese and zinc in your soil and adding these on, this is definitely the most efficient way of doing it. And the last product I really wanted to talk about was Last N. So I know many people have experimented with top dressing with nitrogen during the season. One thing that's hard with UAN, you definitely need to make sure you have the right nozzles on your sprayer. You need to ensure that your crop is not already stressed out because burning can happen very easily with UAN. It's a very hot product. So it's not as safe an option as something like Last N. Last N is a foliar nitrogen. It comes in a liquid form and it's tank mixed with anything. In the field test examples I have below, we mixed it with our fungicide. And it's a 25% nitrogen solution. So we had 3 tests across my territory this year. In Foam Lake, we had the biggest impact out of all of them. We took the untreated check from 12.7% protein up to 13.8 with the application of 1 liter of Last N mixed in with Miravis Ace at that fusarium fungicide timing. So with this, our Last N cost was $4.75 per acre at that 1 liter rate. This field ended up yielding in the 70 bushel zone, and we ended up seeing a return on investment of $20 per acre. So that's a pretty impressive investment in that situation. The next one that we saw a really cool response from was Abernethy. We took the untreated check from 11.4% protein up to 12.4. In this situation, we used 2 liters of Last N, so our cost was $9.50. In this territory, we saw a 58 bushel per acre crop, and our return was still $6.74 per acre. And that was mixed in again with Prozero at that fusarium fungicide timing. In DAFO, however, we saw a negative return on investment because we started with an untreated check of 13.4% protein and we only brought it up to 13.6. So like I said, we have seen better responses when we're starting at that below 13% protein levels and we're bringing it up past 13%. So when you're starting at that already close to 13.5, it's very hard to see heavy increases of over 1% protein just based on the checks that we've done with these products. Last N is still a very exciting product to me if you are struggling with that below 13% protein. As you can see, we saw really good responses in the 2 checks where we were below 13%, and it's something I would definitely encourage you to think about and possibly try. So to sum everything up, what can we do to put in a protein plan? Like I said, you could look at changing some varieties, but I would say the number one thing you can look at doing is ensure a full fertility plan is in place. What's your yield goal for your wheat crop this year? Are you fertilizing for that yield, and is everything you're putting down for fertilizer going to be going towards yield potential? And maybe looking at products like ESN to offset that later nitrogen release. And then secondly, use foliar in season to boost fertility. Do not use foliars as a replacement for spring fertility, just because you're not going to see the same return as you would with investing in that fertilizer product in the spring. I know some years it can be hard. You'll look at a really dry season coming up and it's hard to invest that fertilizer and put it in the ground, but you're not going to be losing it, because we saw in 2019, it was looking to be a really dry year, and we ended up getting an amazing season later on, and we had yields beyond what we ever expected. And it's because we put down what we had planned to put down. So I would encourage you to always have a full fertility plan and stick to that, and then use foliars in season to boost that fertility plan. That's all I had for the agronomics of protein. Are there any questions before I jump to Gerard? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Michelle, I just had a question sent over to me. How much protein do we sacrifice when spraying fungicide on wheat? And more so, right, like the T3 flag leaf timing versus heading?
Yeah, I would always encourage, we've seen that spraying at that T3 versus flag, you will always get a better response. Maybe not necessarily on protein, but definitely in yield and overall protection from disease with that fusarium timing versus a flag. The only time I would recommend a flag application of fungicide on a wheat crop is when you are fighting already really bad leaf disease. So in a situation where we have a really wet May and June and disease is coming up pretty heavy already within that crop, that would be a situation I would recommend a flag, but following up with a fusarium fungicide timing as well. I wouldn't say you'd see a protein loss, but definitely better yield potential and hopefully protein potential with using that fusarium timing. Did that answer your question, Rob?
Yeah, I think potentially the grower was right. If they're spraying at flag, right, are they getting a yield response there, which is diluting, like more yield, diluting the protein? I think that's where the question generated from.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one because if you're increasing that yield potential, I guess technically you could see a protein loss, but that's where I would say make sure that your fertility plan is covering what that total yield potential is for that year. If you are aiming for a 60 bushel wheat crop, make sure you're putting down what that 60 bushel wheat crop is going to need, and then and don't take away what's available in the soil, looking at your soil sampling and minusing that available nitrogen from that fertility plan. Use that as kind of an investment, and hopefully what's left over in your soil can help boost later on in the season along with your full fertility plan, if that makes sense. One question I have here, what was the application rate in Foam Lake and Dayfo? So yeah, Foam Lake, we had the 1 liter application of Flex, or Last End, sorry. And Dayfo, we had the 2 liter application. So definitely a higher Last End cost on the Dayfo. And so we lost a little bit more on that ROI just because we didn't see that crop response. And Abernethy as well, we had that 2 liter application as well. Who's to say we would have seen the same response with 1 liter? It's hard to say. So if you're looking at trying Last End, definitely try that 1 liter. Maybe if you're battling with below 11%, maybe stick with the 2 liter. Good questions. If there's nothing else, I will hand it over to Gerard.
Thanks, Michelle. To everybody watching, don't be scared. There's a method to my madness if you're seeing the corn. I know this is a wheat presentation. Can you hear me, Michelle? Let's just start there before I start talking.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. We want to talk about wheat and the recent wheat rally. I mean, we have to get into corn first and what is happening in corn in the rest of the world. If we start at corn, I mean, with the US corn situation, the USDA that came out a couple of weeks ago on the 2020 US crop, they kind of reduced the bushels per acre to a 175.8. That's down from a 178.4 last month, and was a larger cut than anyone was expecting. The net result was a 250 million bushel reduction in the crop size. Couple that with a 325 million in projected exports and a cut of 75 million bushels for feed use, you end up with a net decrease for the 2021 carryover crop of 465 million bushels. That brings us down to like a 1.7 million bushels, and that's probably the tightest US carry crop in several years that we did have. And we'll get into the reason for some of that. I mean, most of it is feed, and China is buying a lot. They're just stockpiling a lot of this stuff, and there's weather concerns, and South America and the US crop is not as big as we just stated. You can just go to the next one, Michelle. If you look at this one, I mean, it kind of shows you that the US corn ending stocks is lower compared to previous years. There's a lot of theses out there. I mean, one that I like seeing playing out is like the rest of the world is kind of catching up to US yields. Like at 175, I mean, you don't see that every day in Europe or the Southern Hemisphere, but genetics and fertilizers catching up and then just helping the rest of the world as well. You can just go to the next one as well. If we look at the US corn stocks, I mean, it's in a decreasing. That's partly COVID and lockdowns fault because we have seen a lot of ethanol demand going away. Everybody's locked down. I mean, there's not a lot of ethanol demand and there's not a lot of use for corn at the moment. If you go to the next one, just to give you an idea of where corn futures are trading, it's basically a straight line up since August, which is good, but it's worrying as well because I mean, if this is happening prior to harvest or in harvest, where could it go to? From a technical point of view, I mean, if we can push above a 428, that's kind of where that black line is there, or that sort of that red line at the top there. I mean, there's room to move a little bit higher. So currently today we're trading at a 425. This last 2 days, I mean, it's just been straight up again on corn. This chart is about 2 days old. If we can break that 428, there's room to go to like a 460 on the longer term view. I don't think we'll see that $7 we saw in, was it 2011, 2012? But there is room to run. Go to the next one, please, Michelle. So this is just a comparison between barley, corn, and wheat, which is mostly the feed values. And it seems very likely that feed grains from China will continue to go higher at the moment. Compared to the price of imported corn, it's still affordable for millers. For sorghum and barley and other feed and feed wheat as well, isn't far behind. We do suspect that if this rally goes too far, I mean, China will just start selling their stockpiles at a profit. I mean, we have seen it in the past and they might do it again. So that will be the watch out, but I can't see that happening currently because China is in a building stage. They're building their hog herd and it's growing. I think year on year it grew already like 10 to 15%. And I think they're getting ready for a second wave or second lockdown. With the situation we're living in these days, everything is about food and food security. And I think everybody's just stockpiling, kind of doom preppers mentality, if you want to throw that one out there. You can go to the next one, please, Michelle. Any questions on corn before I get into wheat? Okay. When it comes to wheat, go to the next one, please, Michelle. If we look into wheat, I mean, why there's so much wheat in the world. I mean, if you look at this chart, I like showing this chart to clients. Basically, every month of the year, somebody in the world is harvesting wheat or something's happening in wheat except February. So that's why, I mean, you don't see wheat move the same as canola or corn because there's a lot of growers in the world and there's probably the biggest growing crop out there. Just go to the next one, please, Michelle. If we look at world wheat production, and here's where it gets really negative at the moment, and I'm not here to be a doomsday prophet today, I'm just showing the numbers. If you look at wheat world production, I mean, year on year it's been increasing except for 2018, 2019, and we are projecting like 2021 would be a world, like a record as well. If you go to the next one, if you look at the beginning stocks plus the production, I mean, it just keeps on increasing, which is good in a sense because we are finding ways to get rid of the wheat as well. I mean, third world countries are trying to be more buying more bread as staple food. A lot of more wheat is being produced and getting into feed as well. So we are finding room for everything. If you go on to the next one, if you look at the world wheat ending stocks that they're predicting, it's 320 million. So this is huge. But if you go to the next one, you look, if you take China out, I mean, it kind of changes a lot. We're like still on par. So China is a huge hoarder of wheat as well. So between China and India, this is the ones that we normally keep an eye on. Not that they sell it back to the market, but if it does get to attractive prices, I mean, they could potentially flood the market. But in the current situation we're in, they're just trying to look out for number one and feeding their people at the moment. If you go to the next one, we look at global wheat stocks to usage, which is a 40%. So compare this, just for the guys that loves the numbers, like compare this to like a canola one. Canola sitting at 11% or 15%. So at 46 or 43%, I mean, that's about 130 to 145 days of wheat left in the world that we could use. So what that essentially means is we can go 145 days without harvesting any wheat somewhere in the world, and we'll still survive on wheat. And if you remember to that couple of slides back that I showed you, like there's every month of the year, there's somebody's producing wheat somewhere in the world. So this just keeps on increasing since 2011, 2012. If you go to the next one, please, Michelle. If we look at the wheat production changes from last year to this year, I mean, you see the biggest one is the EU, and that's probably where most of our wheat has been shipping out to these last couple of weeks or months. Russia, Australia has been increasing their production. Australia had an increase of about 25%, but it's not alarming because they had the last 2 years to 4 years, they had a really drought situation. So they kind of just in a normal season. And that's why we saw a huge increase from them. The dark horse here would be Russia, because they predominantly export about 80 to 85 million tons per year. There is a couple of weather concerns in the Black Sea region at the moment, so we'll keep an eye out on Russia, what's happening there weather concern-wise as well. And we might see some demand into Europe if Russia can't supply that. The thing with Russia as well is they've got freight advantage over North America because they're right at the doorstep of Europe and all the European Union countries down there as well. Let's go to the next one, please. Just to show you on how we work out or how North America compares to other countries. If you look at the red line, you would see that is the Russia, that's the Black Sea region. And that's basically the Walmart of wheat. And we normally take our prices from that or try to compare with that. Obviously, when we have more better protein and better grade than them, but we have to take into account ocean freight insurance to get it to where the biggest buyers is in Europe. If we bring that back to, you can go to the next one, please, Michelle. If we bring that back to a Canadian wheat supply and demand, if we look at the exports, we have surpassed last year's date by a total of 1.1 million tons, which is incredible. I mean, we haven't seen those numbers in a while. There's also been an up in the feed market rally, which includes corn and barley, which means a higher feed use potential for wheat. Although we typically see high feed use in years when quality has been very low. This year, however, we could see the good quality wheat destined for export and it could make its way into feed. And we kind of saw that when we looked at the barley and corn feed comparison chart as well. Like we'll see, just because there's so much wheat in the world, your good quality wheat will probably just go into feed as well, because guys need to switch out rations between either corn or barley or wheat. So the rationing behind that is just buying the cheapest to grow the herd or add value to your cattle or hogs or whatever. If you go to the next one, if we looked at, this is a breakdown into a bar chart form, just to show you where we are trading, or just put a visual behind on where our production is ending. And if you go to the next one, this is an interesting one. It's probably not as straightforward, but if you look at this one, farm deliveries this crop year shows that farmers have delivered 20% of the total farm supplies into licensed facilities. Now, normally the 5-year average is between 19.3 to 19%. So we're way ahead of last year at the same pace. If the percentage was significantly higher, I mean, that would show us that there's a possible argument that higher supplies has made it into the pipeline. However, at this time, the data is not supporting that theory. So we're currently on pace of our 5-year average this crop year compared to previous years as well. If you go to the next one, please. So if we look at our total wheat supply, it's kind of hitting the same 5-year average that we normally see over the last couple of years. So not too alarming, but in the grand scheme of things, like it's not bullish compared to the world wheat supply. So we still need to keep that in the back of our heads, what's happening worldwide. Just go to the next one, please. So if you look at this one, I mean, this is our Canadian wheat ending stocks. The carry projections is at 4.3 million tons, which is almost exactly in line with what was carried out last year and in the last 5 years. It's kind of on the average of that. And it's kind of showing us that the market is willing to carry out about 4 million tons per year. And with extra capacity in Vancouver this year, this could likely mean a competitive environment comes in spring for Canadian wheat. And with a tightening canola S&D as well as spring and early outlook, it could be very nice for Canadian farmers as pricing goes. So what does this mean? What does this all mean? If you just go to the next one, please. So what all that info kind of means is the market is telling us, and it's not asking us politely, to sell the deferred. So if you look at this chart, and like reps like love throwing this chart out. I mean, currently, if you're looking where we're trading now compared to where prices could go in April, May, the market is telling us to think about pricing wheat now, but don't sell it as a December contract. Start looking at pricing it as a May or a June delivery, or further out, or even a March if we don't want to deliver in that seeding window. So now the question is like, how are we going to do that? I mean, how do we take advantage of prices further out? And there's a variety of contracts, I mean, that we could do. And this is normally where we use like a pro pricing contract, because with the pro pricing contracts, it allows the trader or the pool to trade all these different elements. So they can trade Chicago wheat, they can trade Kansas wheat, they can trade the spread between Minneapolis wheat and Kansas wheat, stuff that we can't do on normal contracts. Cargill has a variety of contracts, and we have 14 contracts and a contract that fits every farm. If you can go to the next one, please, Michelle. And then with that said, I would love to challenge growers, to challenge us and challenge the reps, which means to help us find a scenario on your farm to find the right contract, to find the right fit, to add value on your farm. This is what we are good at, and I know nobody else is offering these types of contracts, but there's a specific contract for a specific farmer, for a specific strategy on every farm. That's all that I have. I went through it a bit quick. Any questions? Any concerns?
Gerard, does it pay for Canadian growers to produce high protein wheat, or could we aim to be at an average and still be valuable?
On average, yes, but this year being 2020, you'll still get paid for having higher protein. But as we saw, with feed prices just going higher and this abundance of wheat out there and good quality wheat out there, the market's not really willing to pay that huge premium for protein. But this year is the exception. So, I mean, I wouldn't compare it to this year. To other years, yes, it does pay. I mean, if you just, that calculation that you did on return on investment, I mean, and I'm a big believer, I mean, if you can get a good return on investment of 3 to 5%, I mean, it is worth it. In the long run. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
And if you just go to the last slide, I mean, that's my information, and I'm my mother's prettiest son. If anybody wants to know how I look, feel free to reach out to me. I mean, I'm always available to take calls, and if you want to set up a 3-way call with your rep and discuss strategy or discuss our market sense program, I'm available all the time. So please don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us.
Are there any other questions before we depart? If anything comes up later, feel free to text Gerard or myself. If you need my number, text the rep who invited you, or just text the rep who invited you, and we can direct the questions from there. Again, make sure you let us know you attended today, and we can hopefully put you in a draw to win some prizes. And thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Thanks so much, everybody.